One of the most terrifying natural disasters in history struck the Roman world when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. This volcano had been quiet for centuries, so people living nearby had no warning. Suddenly, it blasted ash, pumice, and poisonous gases into the sky. The eruption buried entire towns, including Pompeii and Herculaneum, under meters of volcanic material. Streets, homes, and even food were preserved in the ash, freezing everyday life in time. Hundreds of people died instantly, many found in positions showing their last moments of panic. The eruption also destroyed farmland and local businesses, leaving survivors struggling to rebuild. Ships could not reach the coast because of ash and floating debris, cutting off trade and supplies. People in the region were left shocked and traumatized for decades. In 165, the Roman Empire faced one of its deadliest health crises, the Antonine Plague. This epidemic spread quickly as soldiers returned from campaigns in the east, carrying a mysterious and deadly disease. Cities and towns across the empire were affected, and ancient sources describe streets filled with the sick and dying. Historians believe tens of thousands of people may have died, including soldiers needed to defend the empire. The plague caused food shortages because farms and markets were disrupted. Taxes fell, armies struggled to recruit, and local governments struggled to respond. Everyone in this region had to deal with the deaths, social unrest, and economic damage caused by the plague. In 250, Rome was hit by another deadly epidemic, later called the Plague of Cyprian, named after a bishop who described its terrible effects. The disease caused high fever, vomiting, and bleeding. Ancient cities were overwhelmed as thousands died, and survivors struggled to care for the sick. Soldiers and workers were not available to maintain farms, roads, and cities, leading to food shortages and economic problems. The plague made an already fragile Roman Empire even weaker, contributing to political instability and local rebellions. It spread in waves, striking urban centers hardest, but affecting rural areas as well. People lived in constant fear about both the illness and the collapse of daily life. In 376, the Roman Empire faced a crisis not from nature or disease, but from people. Large groups of Gothic tribes, fleeing from the Huns, crossed into Roman lands seeking safety. The empire allowed them in, but officials could not manage the influx. Food was not provided properly, corruption spread, and tensions between Romans and the newcomers rose. This mismanagement caused famine and violent clashes. Eventually, the Goths rebelled, leading to many battles. People suffered from hunger, war, and fear, and the events of this year set the stage for the decline of the Western Roman Empire. In 476, the Western Roman Empire came to an end when a Germanic general named Odoacer removed the young emperor, Romulus Augustulus, from power. This event marked the collapse of central Roman authority in the West, ending centuries of Roman rule. Cities that had once been busy and thriving began to shrink, trade slowed down, and armies were no longer able to defend the borders effectively. Taxes and law enforcement systems broke down, leaving people unsure about safety and resources. Ordinary citizens faced uncertainty, as local leaders replaced the Roman officials who had once controlled law and order. Trade networks vanished, education systems weakened, and cities lost their infrastructure. In 536, a massive volcanic eruption, or multiple eruptions, covered the sky with ash and dust, blocking sunlight for months. People in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East saw the sun darkened, and summers became extremely cold. Crops failed because there was not enough light or warmth to grow food. Without food, famine spread quickly. Farmers could not feed their families, and entire communities suffered. Records from the time describe a dry fog that dimmed the sun and made the world look like winter even in summer. The lack of sunlight caused temperatures to drop, rivers froze in some places, and trade slowed as roads became impassable or dangerous. Governments struggled to support their people because tax income and resources were low. The eruption also led to disease and population decline, as malnutrition made people more vulnerable. Historians call it the worst year to be alive in history, because the environmental effects triggered a chain of disasters across the globe. In 627, the Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid Empire were exhausted from years of fighting. The Byzantine Empire launched a daring campaign deep into Persian territory and fought the Battle of Nineveh in December. Although the Byzantines won the battle, Both empires had suffered huge losses. Soldiers, civilians, and towns had been destroyed or heavily damaged during the Long War. Economies were weakened, crops failed, and taxes rose to pay for the armies. Many people faced poverty and hunger. The war also left both empires vulnerable to new threats. After the Sassanids were weakened, Arab armies soon expanded rapidly, and Byzantium could no longer defend all its lands. Entire regions were depopulated or destroyed, leaving lasting consequences for trade, culture, and governance. Ordinary people felt the burn of the war through famine, disease, and insecurity, while political leaders faced the challenge of rebuilding empires on weakened foundations. In 755, Tang China faced one of its worst disasters when General An Lushan rebelled against the emperor. On December 16th, An Lushan's forces captured Luoyang and Chang'an, the empire's two main cities. This rebellion caused chaos across the country. Armies fought constantly, and many peasants were killed, starved, or forced to flee their homes. Cities were destroyed, farmland was ruined, and trade stopped entirely. The rebellion weakened the Tang dynasty's control over China. Local warlords gained power as central authority declined, and millions of people died from warfare, famine, and disease. Ordinary people lost security and prosperity, while the empire faced political fragmentation. In 879, China experienced one of the most destructive events of the 9th century. Huang Chao, a man from a family involved in the salt trade, became angry after failing to gain a government position. He gathered followers and started a massive rebellion against the Tang dynasty. His army moved across eastern and southern China, attacking towns, villages, and cities along the way. By the end of the campaign, Huang Chao had taken control of major cities. The fighting destroyed farms, cut off trade routes, and caused widespread famine. Millions of people either died from the violence, starvation, or diseases that spread as communities collapsed. The rebellion weakened the central government so badly that the Tang dynasty never regained its strength, leaving China politically fragmented for decades. The rebellion destroyed centuries of stability, undermined agriculture, and caused enormous human suffering. Cities burned, families were displaced, and the empire's resources were exhausted. The year 934 was devastating for the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East. Once a mighty empire, with Baghdad as its capital, the Abbasids were weakened by infighting, regional rebellions, and poor leadership. Civil war erupted as rival factions fought for control over the empire. At the same time, a severe famine hit the region. Crops failed due to neglect of irrigation systems and poor planning. People could not grow enough food, and prices soared. Villages were abandoned, trade slowed, and countless families went hungry. The combination of war and famine made it impossible for the government to protect or feed its people. The effects of 934 were long-lasting. Central authority collapsed, local rulers became independent, and Baghdad's prominence as a center of wealth and culture declined. Families starved, armies fought relentlessly, and the empire lost its power to maintain order. In 1099, Jerusalem became the center of one of the bloodiest events of the Middle Ages. Crusader armies from Europe arrived and laid siege to the city. After weeks of fighting, they finally breached the walls. Once inside, the Crusaders killed large numbers of the city's Muslim and Jewish residents. Contemporary accounts suggest thousands were slaughtered, and many more were forced to flee. The massacre sent shockwaves through Europe and the Middle East, changing the balance of power in the region. The siege also disrupted trade, displaced communities, and intensified religious conflicts that lasted for centuries. Jerusalem, once a multi-faith city, became a symbol of conquest and religious warfare. On October 11, 1138, northern Syria was struck by a massive earthquake centered near Aleppo. The quake and its aftershocks destroyed homes, mosques, and public buildings. Reports suggest that hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Some estimates claim over 200,000 lives were lost, making it one of the deadliest earthquakes in history. The region was already weakened by ongoing conflicts between crusaders and local rulers. The earthquake destroyed villages, trade routes, and farmland. Survivors faced hunger, disease, and the challenge of rebuilding their communities in a region without strong central authority. The disaster, combined with political instability, made recovery extremely difficult, leaving Aleppo and its surroundings in crisis for years. In 1258, Baghdad faced one of the most catastrophic attacks in its history. Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, led a massive Mongol army to conquer the city. The siege began in late January, and by February 10th, the Mongols had broken through the walls and poured into the city. Baghdad had been a center of learning, culture, and governance, home to the famous House of Wisdom where scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The Mongols unleashed a campaign of destruction. Tens of thousands of people were killed, though estimates vary from 200,000 to higher numbers. The invaders captured the caliph and executed him in a brutal manner meant to avoid spilling royal blood. Many manuscripts and books from the House of Wisdom were destroyed, and some were thrown into the Tigris River until the water turned black with ink. Scholars, artisans, and officials were slaughtered, and entire neighborhoods were razed. Baghdad, once a symbol of knowledge and prosperity, was left in ruins. The Abbasid Caliphate, as it had existed, came to an end, and the Mongols established dominance across the Middle East. The destruction of the city also meant the loss of priceless cultural and scientific knowledge, setting back learning for generations. Europe faced a catastrophe in 1347 when the Black Death arrived in Sicily from the Black Sea. This deadly disease spread quickly through trade routes, carried by fleas on rats. Within just a few years, it killed between 1.25% of Europe's population. Cities emptied as families disappeared and villages were abandoned. The loss of life caused a shortage of workers, leading to economic collapse and social unrest across the continent. The Black Death did not just kill people, it disrupted society. Food production fell, and famine followed in many areas. Governments and churches struggled to function as so many leaders and officials died. Fear and superstition spread alongside the plague. Some believed it was divine punishment, while others thought the air itself was poisoned. Because the cause was not understood, communities could not respond effectively, making the situation even worse. The scale of the disaster meant that Europe would not recover its population for generations. Trade slowed dramatically, cities became depopulated, and knowledge and skills were lost with the death of so many people. Families and communities were torn apart, leaving long-lasting trauma. May 29, 1453 marks a turning point in history when Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, fell to the Ottoman army under Mehmed II. The city had been a stronghold for over 1,000 years and was a major cultural, political, and economic hub, bridging Europe and Asia. The fall of Constantinople ended the Byzantine Empire. Its people faced slaughter, enslavement, and displacement. Many people fled to Italy, and the Ottoman Empire established Istanbul as its new capital, controlling the eastern Mediterranean and reshaping trade routes. The year 1520 was disastrous for the Aztec Empire in modern Mexico. Smallpox arrived shortly after Spanish conquerors landed in the region. Indigenous people had no immunity to European diseases, and millions died in the first wave alone. The epidemic killed rulers, soldiers, and farmers, devastating Aztec society. With so many people dead, food production collapsed, communities broke apart, and the empire became vulnerable to conquest. Disease worked alongside military campaigns to bring down one of the most powerful civilizations in the Americas. The Aztec Empire, which had stood for centuries, fell rapidly, and millions of lives were lost. The demographic collapse reshaped Mesoamerica and had long-term consequences for the Americas. In 1644, one of China's most powerful dynasties, the Ming, collapsed in a dramatic and violent way. The Ming had ruled for nearly 3 centuries, creating a strong empire with thriving cities, trade, and culture. But by the 1600s, the dynasty was weak. A mix of political corruption, heavy taxation, and environmental disasters made life difficult for ordinary people. Severe droughts and crop failures caused famine, while epidemic diseases spread rapidly through crowded towns and rural villages. The situation worsened when rebel armies, led by Li Zicheng, marched toward the capital. Beijing fell, and the last Ming emperor took his own life rather than surrendered. While the capital lost, the Manchu forces from the northeast seized the opportunity to invade and establish the Qing dynasty, which would rule China for nearly 3 centuries. For the population, 1644 was catastrophic. Families faced hunger, cities were looted, and social order collapsed in many regions. Farmers abandoned their fields, and people fled to escape the fighting and disease. Trade and communication networks broke down, leaving millions without access to food or safety. A once prosperous empire crumbled in a single year, leaving people vulnerable and changing the course of Chinese history permanently. The year 1770 in Bengal, now part of India and Bangladesh, was a year of unimaginable suffering. Known as the Great Bengal Famine, it caused the deaths of between 1 and 10 million people. A severe drought destroyed rice crops, which were the main source of food for millions. Hunger spread quickly across villages, and many people abandoned their homes searching for food and water. The famine was worsened by the British East India Company, which collected high taxes even when crops failed. Farmers had little to eat, and no money to buy food. Villages were emptied as people either died or fled. Trade slowed, markets collapsed, and disease spread among the starving population. Families were torn apart, children were abandoned, and traditional village life broke down. Many regions experienced violence as desperate people tried to survive. The famine affected every level of society, and the economic consequences lasted for decades. In 1816, the world experienced extreme climate disruption that became known as the Year Without a Summer. This was caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia the year before. The volcano released enormous amounts of ash and gases into the atmosphere, which blocked sunlight and lowered temperatures across the northern hemisphere. Crops failed in Europe and North America. Frosts were reported in June and July, and staple crops like wheat, corn, and potatoes were ruined. Food became scarce, prices skyrocketed, and families faced hunger. Livestock suffered, and many people were forced to leave their homes in search of food. The famine and cold weather triggered social unrest. Riots broke out in towns where food was unavailable, and rural communities struggled to survive. The year 1945 was one of the most devastating years in all of history. World War II finally ended, but the cost was catastrophic. In Europe, Germany surrendered in May, revealing the horrifying scale of the Holocaust. Millions of Jews, Romani people, political prisoners, and others had been systematically killed in concentration camps. The evidence shocked the world and left a legacy of trauma and grief. In Asia, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August. Tens of thousands of people died instantly, and tens of thousands more suffered from radiation sickness. Entire cities were destroyed, and survivors faced long-term health problems and social disruption. Globally, the war left millions of people displaced. Europe's infrastructure was destroyed, and many countries faced famine, disease, and economic collapse. Political boundaries shifted as the Allies divided territories and the Cold War began. In early 2020, COVID-19 spread rapidly across the globe, causing illness, death, and unprecedented disruption to daily life. COVID-19 is highly contagious and can lead to severe respiratory illness, especially in older adults and those with underlying health conditions. Hospitals in many countries were overwhelmed as cases surged, and medical supplies such as ventilators, masks, and protective gear ran dangerously low. Governments implemented lockdowns, travel restrictions, and social distancing measures to slow the spread of the virus. Businesses closed, jobs were lost, and millions of people faced financial insecurity. International trade slowed, supply chains broke down, and essential goods became scarce in some regions. Stock markets plummeted, and economic inequality increased as poorer communities bore the brunt of the crisis. People experienced isolation, mental health struggles, and the loss of loved ones. Education systems were disrupted as schools and universities switched to remote learning, affecting millions of students. The initial months of 2020 were marked by uncertainty, fear, and widespread suffering. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like, comment down below your thoughts on any of the years I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.